Part 17. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 161. Chen Tao's eyebrows wrinkled slightly. He looked at the person in front of him and said lightly, "The analysis is ineffective for you." "Why?" Jessen looked at Chen Tao expressionlessly and said, "I have already given up my identity as a genetic body and changed myself into a spiritual body. The spiritual body cannot be analyzed. If I am immortal, you can't touch me." Of spiritual body? Can the genetic body also be changed into a spiritual body? Chen Tao looked at Chen Tao, his eyebrows slightly stretched, and said, "In other words, your body no longer exists." Yes. Jessen looked at Chen Tao and said, "The genetic body is too fragile, so I gave up the genetic body and chose the spiritual body." Jessen looked at Chen Tao and said, "I wonder if you can understand what I'm doing." Chen Tao was silent for a moment, looked at Jessen and said, "I can't understand. Becoming a spiritual body, do you still have emotions? Can you still have children?" Chen Tao looked at Jessen. Jessen said calmly, "Emotions are part of the spirit, and I naturally feel it too. As for having children, I don't have such decadent thoughts, and I don't think it is necessary. Low-level beings use the method of having children to let the next generation continue their genes. But I am immortal and do not need to do such a thing at all." Chen Tao crossed his arms and said, "Your understanding is quite special, but I disagree. For me, having children means more than just passing on genes." There are other words that Chen Tao didn't say. Jessen became a spiritual body, which means that Jessen is no longer a man. Chen Tao couldn't understand this kind of inhuman existence. After all, if Chen Tao were to become a spiritual body and remain motionless in front of the beauties at home, it would be better to die. Jessen's approach was too extreme, and it was a thought that Chen Tao could not understand. Jessen pondered for a moment, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "Yes, you are already the sixth generation of the genetic body. It can be said that you are the pinnacle of the genetic body. Since you have reached this level, you cannot identify with the spiritual body. It's also reasonable." Chen Tao looked at Jessen and said, "How many people like you are there in your small universe?" The artificial man created by Jessen shocked Chen Tao. Although that thing couldn't withstand lightning attacks, it could resist his analytical ability and could injure him at the same time. This was the first time Chen Tao had seen such a situation after upgrading to the sixth generation gene. If there were more people like Jessen who could create artificial humans, they might be able to pose a threat to Chen Tao. When Jessen heard this, he looked at Chen Tao and said, "I am the god of my small universe. There is only one like me in my small universe." God. This guy is just a scientist who makes artificial weapons, and he actually calls himself a god. However, in this way, the answer becomes clear. It seems that special guys like Jessen are rare. Chen Tao said, "Well, to me, the way you greeted me before was a bit rough, so I'll teach you a lesson first." Bang! Jessen was startled. He turned his face and saw that his right arm had disappeared. Seeing this, Jessen's expression changed slightly. The spiritual body is composed of pure spirit. Physical attacks are completely ineffective against Gishin and cannot be analyzed. After all, he is not material. It stands to reason that Chen Tao would never be able to cause him any harm, but now Chen Tao easily removed one of his arms. In other words, Chen Tao has the ability to attack him. Jessen looked at Chen Tao with a solemn expression. "How did you do it?" Chen Tao crossed his arms across his chest, looked at Jessen, and said calmly, "How I did it is not important. What is important is that you should know that even though you are a spiritual body, you cannot do whatever you want. It's not difficult for me to kill you. It is true that mental power cannot be analyzed by ordinary computers, but with the nebula behind Chen Tao can step into the spiritual world at any time. The spiritual world is a mode for mental power. In that mode, Chen Tao can attack others at will. Of mental strength. As a spiritual body, Gashin was naturally an existence that Chen Tao could attack. Jessen frowned. He couldn't figure it out. He wanted to ask, but looking at Chen Tao's indifferent expression, Jessen knew that Chen Tao would not be able to tell him the secret. Jessen was silent for a moment, nodded slightly, and said, "I understand, see you again when you have the chance." As he spoke, a miniature wormhole appeared behind Jessen. He sank into a miniature wormhole and disappeared. See this scene in front of you. Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. An artificial human that cannot withstand thunder and lightning, but can withstand genetic analysis, a spiritual body composed entirely of mental power, a spiritual body that cannot be analyzed by computers at all. It seems that there are still many special things in other small universes besides Chen Tao's. Suddenly, Chen Tao noticed another miniature wormhole appearing in front of him. A beautiful figure walked out of the miniature wormhole. Chen Tao took a closer look and found that the person coming was Rose. Rose was wearing a black lace skirt with a very short skirt, her slender legs were wrapped in black stockings, and she was wearing a pair of black high heels. She looked at Chen Tao and then at the place where Jessen disappeared just now. Her eyebrows slightly stretched and she said, "Spiritual body, there are so many weirdos in the outer universe." Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Rose and said, "Did you just see it?" Upon hearing this, Rose looked at Chen Tao, she smiled and said, "Of course," I said, "now you are Rose's everything, for Rose, your things are the most important, so, I will always pay attention to your every move, husband, and then I will satisfy you." Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly and he said, "It doesn't feel good to be watched." Rose smiled, walked to Chen Tao, entered Chen Tao's arms, put her arms around Chen Tao's neck, looked into Chen Tao's eyes with her big eyes, and said, "This is not surveillance, this is observation." Looking at the beautiful little face in front of him, Chen Tao smiled and said, "Okay, then when you come here, have you discovered what I need?" Rose let go of Chen Tao's neck. She looked at Chen Tao, then smiled and said, "Husband, you must be feeling strange about the android just now." When Chen Tao heard this, he looked at Rose and said, "Well." Rose looked at the place where the artificial man disappeared and said, "I have seen your battle with that artificial man, husband. I am almost certain that the material that makes up that artificial man is as hard as the fourth generation gene body. It's just that the material seems unable to withstand the power of lightning strikes. In other words, it is conductive." Rose looked at Chen Tao and said, "Of course the most important thing is not the material, but its own program. Its attack method is single. Can't withstand lightning strikes. Lightning strikes are actually similar to elemental attacks. Obviously, the pervert just now sacrificed a lot of its performance to focus on the analysis function of the computer. This thing was invented for the genetic body, but if it is against the elemental body, it will be no match. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 162. Chen Tao's eyebrows slightly relaxed, and he crossed his arms. In other words, what Jerson was studying was targeting the genome. Chen Tao said, "Your analysis makes sense." Rose smiled, and she threw herself into Chen Tao's arms again, her arms around Chen Tao's neck. She looked into Chen Tao's eyes and said, "So I have satisfied your needs, husband. What about you, husband? Can you satisfy Rose's needs?" Rose's eyes were full of water, and she looked at Chen Tao expectantly. Chen Tao looked at Rose and said, "What do you need?" Rose leaned close to Chen Tao's ear and whispered a few times. Hearing this, Chen Tao's heart warmed up, and he held Rose horizontally in his arms. Rose's little head leaned on Chen Tao's shoulder, and her big eyes looked straight at Chen Tao. Chen Tao thought, and the two disappeared in place and returned to the bedroom of base number 1. Chen Tao put Rose on the bed, and Rose slowly lay down. She stared at Chen Tao with her big eyes, full of expectation. Chen Tao gently stroked her small cheek, looked into her eyes, and said with a smile, "Then I will satisfy your needs." Rose smiled and said, "I look forward to it." Chen Tao leaned down and kissed her. Chen Tao didn't know that he was being affectionate with Rose. There was a beautiful figure standing at the door. The owner of the beautiful figure was Fang Shueqing. Fang Shueqing looked at the scene in front of her, her face slightly red, retracted her sight, turned around and left. The tail behind her swayed gently, she hurried back to her room, entered the room, sat on the bed, and she could feel her heartbeat quickening. Miling's cheeks were hot, and then her body was slightly hot. She slowly lay on the bed, lying on her side, curled up. She slowly closed her eyes. Fang Shueqing actually didn't quite understand her changes. Ever since she was saved by Chen Tao last time, Chen Tao's figure has been in her heart. Fang Shueqing knows very well that she was saved because of Chen Tao, and that she can have such a free and independent life now because of Chen Tao. For Fang Shueqing, Chen Tao is a special existence. So much so that Fang Shueqing would think of Chen Tao when she was dreaming recently. Sometimes, when she saw Chen Tao being intimate with other girls, she would even want to replace that girl. Fang Shueqing wanted to be hugged by Chen Tao and wanted to be loved by that man. This thought and desire were very strong. Fang Shueqing didn't know what was wrong with her. After all, Fang Shueqing didn't know herself. If Rose or Katie saw this, they would know what was going on. Rose and Katie had studied creatures like spirits. Spirits are very sensitive creatures. Although their parents are intelligent genes, that is, humans, spirits are different from humans. They are more like a collection of beasts and humans. When a spirit is very sensitive, she can accurately feel the malice and kindness of others towards her. When the spirits grow up, they will subconsciously look for their partners. They will choose some excellent and kind opposite sex as their partners. Although Fang Shueqing did not have the idea of choosing a partner, her subconscious mind has already chosen one for her. So, Fang Shueqing is so eager for Chen Tao to hug her now. Of course, Fang Shueqing didn't know, so she could only suppress her inner desire. 5 hours later, Chen Tao was wearing a bathrobe and sitting on the edge of the bed. He looked back at Rose behind him. Rose closed her eyes and lay on the bed, already asleep. Seeing this, Chen Tao got up, stepped on the slippers, and went out. Nothing to do, walk around. Chen Tao walked along the corridor, intending to go to the hall to take a look. There is a crossroads in front, walk forward. Suddenly, Chen Tao smelled a fragrance coming from the right. He was slightly startled, turned sideways, and a beautiful figure threw himself into his arms. She didn't stand firmly and fell directly into Chen Tao's arms. Chen Tao subconsciously raised his hand and hugged the other's waist, through the fabric. Chen Tao could feel the delicate skin of the other person. Chen Tao looked at the girl in his arms and said, "Are you okay?" The girl raised her face, and Chen Tao saw a beautiful face and a pair of charming phoenix eyes. Such a charming girl is naturally Fang Shueqing, who is a charmer. Fang Shueqing blushed, and hurriedly came out of Chen Tao's arms and stood in front of Chen Tao. So beautiful. Fang Shueqing wore a white shirt with off-shoulder and a red pleated mini-skirt, which perfectly outlined her mature and enchanting figure. With her white skin, she was simply beautiful. The long legs, which were at least 1.2 meters long, were wrapped in white stockings, and she was wearing a pair of white round high-heeled boots. A furry white ear and a furry tail, but added a bit of exotic charm to her. She exudes a charming and enchanting temperament. Her delicate facial features and charming phoenix eyes make her so beautiful. Fang Shueqing noticed that Chen Tao was looking at her. She wagged her tail slowly, her furry ears stretched slightly, and her mouth slightly raised, shy and timid. That cute look made Chen Tao feel happy. Chen Tao suppressed his strange feeling and said, "I'm going to the hall." Do you want to go too? Fang Shuiqing nodded slightly and hummed softly. Fang Shuiqing's unique tone made people feel a little bit soft. This woman is too charming. No wonder she is called a charmer. Chen Tao suppressed his inner thoughts and said, "Let's go." Then, Chen Tao took the lead and walked forward. Fang Shuiqing followed behind Chen Tao. She raised her face and looked at Chen Tao's back. Chen Tao's back was tall and broad. It was completely different from Fang Shuiqing herself. She had looked at herself in the mirror and felt so weak and powerless. Would this make a man? Fang Shuiqing's heartbeat quickened slightly, and the tail behind her couldn't help but shake gently. When Chen Tao arrived at the hall, he found Lin sitting on the sofa in casual clothes, watching the TV screen. There was no one else except Lin. Lin noticed Chen Tao, her eyebrows slightly relaxed, a smile appeared on her face, and she said, "Honey, why did you come out?" Chen Tao said, "I came out for a walk." He sat down on the sofa, looked around, and said, "Where are they?" Lin said, "Ziking and He Yuxuan went to training, Bai Zi is helping them train. Wu Yao is doing research in her institute, and Li Xiaolu went to school. Rose, I don't know where she went. Rose, is in the bedroom now." Of course Chen Tao didn't say this. Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, "What about you, why are you watching TV here, isn't it boring?" Lin looked at Chen Tao, she smiled and said, "How can it be boring? I haven't been on Earth for a long time, and the movies here are quite interesting." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 163. Chen Tao looked at Lin and said, "Isn't there any in Dragon City?" Dragon City is full of warriors, and the only entertainment for warriors is training. Lin said, "Besides training, there is nothing else. Also, after all, Dragon City is the front line of protecting the balance of the universe." Chen Tao's eyes fell on Fang Shuiqing next to him. Fang Shuiqing was sitting on the sofa beside her. When Chen Tao looked over, she was also looking at Chen Tao. Their eyes met. Fang Shuiqing blushed, and quickly turned her face to look at the TV screen. She didn't dare to look at Chen Tao over there, but her cheeks turned red, and the tail behind her was a little restless. Was Fang Shuiqing peeking at herself just now? Chen Tao was a little confused, but he didn't think much about it. He looked away and looked at Lin. Lin seemed to have noticed this scene, her eyebrows stretched slightly, and then she revealed an intriguing smile. Chen Tao looked away from Fang Shuiqing, looked at Lin, and said, "Do you train daily in Dragon City? Is there nothing else you can do?" Lin nodded slightly and said, "Dragon people don't have such an easy life. We are worried every day." "Worried? What are you worried about?" Chen Tao looked at Lin. Lin said, "Death, every day we have to worry about ourselves or our companions tomorrow. After all, death can occur anytime and anywhere in our mission. After all, the second gene body is not invincible. Is this what Dragon City is like?" Chen Tao crossed his chest with his hands and leaned back on the chair. He thought of the proposal Katie gave him yesterday. Katie wants Chen Tao to become the leader of Dragon City. If Chen Tao's own technology is distributed to Dragon City, it will improve the overall combat effectiveness of the Dragon civilization and reduce the casualties of the Dragon people. However, ruling the Dragon civilization is really not in line with Chen Tao's thoughts. He wants to live a leisurely life rather than being a ruler. Chen Tao withdrew his gaze and looked at Fang Shuiqing subconsciously. He met Fang Shuiqing's gaze again. Fang Shuiqing's face turned slightly red. This time she did not look away, but looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao blinked. What happened to this woman? Shuiqing. Suddenly Lin spoke up. Hearing this voice, Fang Shuiqing was startled, and she looked at Lin. Lin had an inquiring smile on her face and said, "Have you fallen in love with Chen Tao?" Lin's question made Chen Tao slightly confused. "What's the meaning?" Fang Shueqing was startled, with a slight blush on her fair face, and said, "I don't know what love is, so I don't know." Lin hummed and said, "Actually, the love of a charm is easy to judge. If you fall in love with someone, then you will always think about that person, hoping that person will hug you, kiss you, and even think about letting that person does more intimate things with themselves." Chen Tao was slightly stunned when he heard Lin's question. "What do you mean? Like?" Chen Tao was a little confused. Just kidding, Chen Tao and Fang Shueqing had only met a few times so far, and he hadn't even had much face-to-face communication with her. "Can you fall in love with this?" Fang Shueqing's face turned red. She lowered her head shyly. She pursed her lower lip and said, "Then, I have fallen in love with Chen Tao." Chen Tao was stunned. He looked at Fang Shueqing subconsciously. Fang Shueqing's face was as red as a cloud and her head was lowered. Her shy look was very cute. "It's just that Chen Tao doesn't understand. Is this okay?" Lin looked at Chen Tao, smiled, and said, "My husband is so awesome. I have won the heart of a girl again." Chen Tao was silent for a moment, subconsciously touched the back of his head, and then looked at Fang Shueqing. Fang Shueqing lowered her head, her face flushed. Chen Tao said, "Shueqing, are you willing to let me hold you?" He wanted to make sure. Frankly speaking, every man has a desire to dominate beauty, and so does Chen Tao. It was the first time in Chen Tao's life that Fang Shueqing was charming and enchanting. It would be false to say that a man has no idea about such a beautiful woman. Fang Shueqing blushed, raised her face, looked at Chen Tao, and nodded slightly, "I am willing." Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly and he said, "Come here." Fang Shueqing hesitated for a moment, then stood up and walked to Chen Tao's side. Chen Tao stood up and hugged Fang Shueqing. Fang Shueqing was slightly startled. She raised her face and looked at Chen Tao, with a hint of luster in her eyes, "Chen Tao." Her voice made Chen Tao's bones soften. The enchanting spirit is indeed an enchanting spirit. Chen Tao didn't bother to think about it anymore, so he hugged her and left. He came to Fang Shueqing's room, entered the room, and placed Fang Shueqing on the big bed. Fang Shueqing lay down, but her moving eyes were full of nervousness and uneasiness. "Chen Tao." Chen Tao looked at the beautiful face in front of him and said, "Then, can I kiss you?" Fang Shueqing's face was red, and her red eyes were filled with moisture. "Okay." She responded softly. Chen Tao kissed her and said softly in her ear, "Can you give me everything you have?" "Can." After confirming their relationship with Fang Shueqing, Chen Tao spent a day and night with her in Fang Shueqing's room. Until early the next morning. Fang Shueqing woke up, and as soon as she woke up, she saw the man next to her. Looking at the handsome face in front of her, Fang Shueqing had a smile on her face, and she slowly hid her little head in Chen Tao's arms. Very happy. This is the happiest thing in Fang Shueqing's life. Before, because of Fang Shueqing's appearance, she could always feel some disgusting eyes staring at her when she walked on the street, which made her feel sick. In Fang Shueqing's view, men all have strong malice towards her, so she hates men. But now Fang Shueqing found that men are not all bad people. At least in the arms of the man in front of her, Fang Shueqing felt not malice, but tenderness. He was really good to her. Even if sometimes, it was a bit rough, but Fang Shueqing did not reject it. She looked at the face in front of her, which was close at hand, and she slowly approached and took the initiative to kiss Chen Tao's lips. Kissed. Fang Shueqing slowly opened her eyes and saw a pair of eyes looking at her. Fang Shueqing was startled, her face was hot, and she hid her face in Chen Tao's arms and said softly, "Good man, are you awake?" She was very shy. There was nothing more embarrassing than being caught kissing someone secretly. Chen Tao smiled and said, "Well, you're awake." He stroked her white hair and felt it was soft and smooth. Fang Shueqing is really addictive. After getting her, Chen Tao is really addicted. The charmer is worthy of being a charmer. Fang Shueqing didn't say anything either. She closed her eyes and leaned against Chen Tao with a red face. She was very well behaved. Chen Tao said softly, "Come with me to walk downstairs later." Downstairs, Fang Shueqing raised her face and looked at Chen Tao with her beautiful phoenix eyes, with doubts in her eyes. Chen Tao nodded slightly and said with a smile, "You have been on Earth for so long, but you haven't really stepped on the ground of Earth. I'll accompany you to take a look when I'm free." Fang Shueqing's eyes lit up slightly, and she smiled, "Yeah. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 164. Chen Tao agreed with Fang Shueqing and took her to have a look at the surface of the ground. After all, from the time Fang Shueqing arrived here until now, Fang Shueqing has been staying in base number 1 and has never truly stepped into the surface of the Earth star. Now that Chen Tao is free, he happens to take Fang Shueqing down to see the scenery of Earth star. Chen Tao got dressed and stood at the door, waiting quietly for Fang Shueqing to change her clothes and come out. It didn't take long. Creak. Chen Tao heard the sound of the door opening. He turned his face and saw the scene that made Chen Tao's eyes light up slightly. Fang Shueqing was wearing something that looked like an antique suit. The dress was worn in the same way as a shirt. The difference was that it relied on ropes instead of buttons, and had a lace around her waist to outline her slender waist. The fabric was thin and embroidered with red lines. The lines had an antique feel. This was a totem that Chen Tao had never seen before. If Chen Tao's guess is correct, this should be a pattern unique to Fang Shueqing's civilization. The clothes exposed her round and slender shoulders, the fabric clung to her tall and mature figure, and her waist was astonishing. The hem of the clothes is very short, and the slender and straight legs, which are about 1 meter long, are wrapped in white stockings and are wearing a pair of red high heels. The red pattern is paired with white fabric, plus her jade skin that looks like gelatin. The scene in front of him simply made Chen Tao's eyes shine. Fang Shueqing's charming temperament is natural. She was so beautiful that it took her breath away. She tied up her soft snowy hair, and her big furry eyes stood high, looking at Chen Tao. Seeing Chen Tao looking directly at he himself, Fang Shueqing blushed slightly and said, "This is our civilized clothes. Before, when the clothes were gone, Zicheng helped me get a set of these. Is this okay?" Did Zicheng do it? Zicheng should not know the location of Baiyun civilization, but as long as Zicheng tells Lin and the others, it will be easy to get a set of Baiyun civilization clothes. Chen Tao smiled and said, "It's beautiful." Fang Shueqing had a smile on her face. "Then, is it okay if I continue to dress like this? Will those people be scared when they see it?" Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled, "Don't worry, Earth Star civilization is different from your civilization." When Fang Shueqing heard this, she felt a little relieved, nodded slightly, and said, "Well, you said that, then I'm relieved." Chen Tao raised his hand towards Zicheng. When Fang Shueqing saw this, her eyes glowed with a strange light. She slowly came closer and placed her bare hand in Chen Tao's palm. Chen Tao held Fang Shueqing's weak and boneless hand. He smiled and said, "Base number 1, open the micro wormhole, we are going down." A miniature wormhole appeared next to Chen Tao. Chen Tao glanced at the miniature wormhole, then looked at Fang Shueqing and said, "If you want to go shopping in the future, you can tell base number 1 directly." Fang Shueqing is a natural enchantment. She has special genetic abilities and can control the forces of nature, but she is not good at other aspects, such as calculating micro wormholes for teleportation. Therefore, if Fang Shueqing thought about it, she couldn't do it herself and could only rely on base 1. If she wants to come back, she can just tell the android maids at Moon Lake Manor. "Well, Okay, Fang Shueqing nodded repeatedly. Chen Tao took Fang Shueqing's hand and entered the miniature wormhole. The two figures appeared in Yuehu manner. Master, Miss Fang, a voice came from the side. Chen Tao took a look and saw that it was number 10, one of the artificial humans, who was speaking. Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, "We have to go out for a while. You can just do your own thing." Number 10 smiled respectfully and said, "Okay." Chen Tao looked at Fang Shueqing and said, "If you want to go back up there after you come back, just tell her. She can take you back." Fang Shueqing nodded slightly. After making an agreement with Fang Shueqing, a black sports car drove from a distance and stopped in front of Chen Tao. The car door opens. Chen Tao took Fang Shueqing to the passenger seat. He looked at Fang Shueqing and said, "Get in the car." Car, Fang Shueqing blinked and looked at the black thing in front of her, looking confused. Chen Tao said with a smile, "This is a car." Fang Shueqing came from the Baiyun civilization, which was a civilization in the Cold Weapon Age. The only weapons were spears and bows. Of course, that civilization did not have such things as cars. And at base number 1, there is no need for a car. It makes sense that she doesn't recognize him. Fang Shueqing nodded slightly, and at Chen Tao's signal, she got into the car and sat in the passenger seat. Chen Tao got into the driver's seat and started the car. The car left Moon Lake Manor and drove on the road. The wind blew from the car window, and Fang Shueqing's eyes were filled with luster. She looked outside through the car window, and her beautiful blue eyes were filled with blue light. Chen Tao could see Fang Shueqing's change in demeanor through the car's interior mirror, and he couldn't help but smile. Fang Shueqing's every move reveals a different kind of charm and kindness, which is very interesting. The car stopped slowly and stopped in front of a restaurant. Chen Tao hasn't had breakfast today, so he happened to come over to have some breakfast. Chen Tao got out of the car. Fang Shueqing on the side saw the car door open automatically, and she also got out of the car. The moment Fang Shueqing got out of the car, countless eyes fell on Fang Shueqing. Everyone on the street, men, women, old and young, all looked at Fang Shueqing. "Look, that woman. Beauty. My God, is there such a beautiful person in this world? She has ears and a tail. Who is she in cos? No matter who the cos is, she is a great beauty. I'm falling in love with her." A group of men walked by and noticed Fang Shueqing, and started talking about her, their eyes widening. Fang Shueqing blinked and looked around. The enchanting spirit is sensitive, and she can feel other people's malice towards her. In Fang Shueqing's world, she can feel malice as long as someone sees her. But this time Fang Shueqing felt strange, because she didn't feel any malice from those eyes, but instead felt admiration and surprise at her beauty. Fang Shueqing withdrew her gaze and looked at Chen Tao. Seeing Chen Tao looking at her, Fang Shueqing had a smile on her face and trotted to Chen Tao's side, holding Chen Tao's arm. Chen Tao took Fang Shueqing into the restaurant. "She has a boyfriend. My heart is broken too. Pity. What a pity." When Chen Tao and Fang Shueqing entered the restaurant intimately, the group of young men who were fascinated by Fang Shueqing all covered their hearts and looked depressed. Chen Tao and Fang Shueqing entered the Western restaurant. As soon as he entered the Western restaurant, his eyes fell on Fang Shueqing. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 165. Then as those people noticed Fang Shueqing, almost everyone in the restaurant slowly focused their attention on Fang Shueqing. Chen Tao also noticed this scene. This is normal. After all, Fang Shueqing's appearance cannot be resisted by even a civilized king, let alone an ordinary person. "Sir, miss, are you too?" a waitress came in. Her eyes paused on Fang Shueqing, and then she looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao said, "You too?" The waitress nodded slightly and said, "Then please follow me." With that said, the waitress took Chen Tao and Fang Shueqing to the second floor. She took Chen Tao and the two of them to the dining table. "Please take a seat." Chen Tao looked at Fang Shueqing and said, "Sit down." Fang Shueqing hummed and sat down on her seat. Chen Tao sat opposite. Chen Tao picked up the menu placed on the table and glanced at it, then ordered the food with the waitress. "Brother, look at that woman." There were two men in a restaurant not far away. One of the men in a white suit said to the man in a blue suit. The man in blue turned his face slightly and looked at Fang Shueqing, who was not far away. "This figure, these legs, this waist, these breasts, are superb," the man in blue said, "and this face, this temperament, if this woman was born in ancient times, it would be a disaster for the country and the people." When the man in white heard this, he smiled and said, "Really? I think so too. How about it? Our Mr. Johan, is he interested?" When Johan heard this, he glanced at the man in white and said calmly, "Where is Mr. Li Jin?" Li Jin smiled and said, "If this woman is willing to follow me, that would be great." Johan's eyebrows slightly stretched, his hands crossed his chest, and he said, "But I've already taken a liking to him." Li Jin smiled, "Then let's all rely on our abilities." "Well, everyone depends on their ability," Johan said calmly. "Then, who goes first?" Li Jin asked with a smile. Johan said, "You go first." "Okay." Li Jin stood up, twisted his tie and straightened his clothes, and then walked in the direction of Chen Tao. At this time, Chen Tao had already finished ordering, and he also noticed someone coming this way. Chen Tao looked at the man. The person who came was a man in a white suit. The man was walking over with a smile on his face. He looked at Chen Tao, then looked at Fang Shueqing, and said with a smile, "Ms. Sir, I didn't disturb you too, did I? Can I say a few words? This guy is kind of polite. But, what does he want to do?" Fang Shueqing looked at Chen Tao. Noticing Fang Shueqing's gaze, Li Jin's eyes fell on Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked at Li Jin and said, "What's the matter?" Li Jin smiled. He pulled up a chair and sat down. He took out a card from his jacket pocket, handed it to Chen Tao, and said, "This is my business card. Please take a look." Chen Tao took the business card and took a look at it. "This is a business card with a name written on it, Li Jin. His identity as director is written next to it." "Director?" Chen Tao looked at Li Jin, "Is this guy a director?" "Hey, isn't that person director Li Jin?" "It's Li Jin. He won the honor of Best Director last year and is a great director. The one we watched a while ago called Li Fengji was his work." The diners nearby seemed to recognize Li Jin's identity. Chen Tao also heard the whispers next to him. It seemed that this person named Li Jin was indeed a director, and a big one at that. Li Jin looked at Chen Tao and said, "Is this lady my husband's girlfriend?" Hearing what Li Jin said, Fang Shueqing blushed slightly and looked at Chen Tao with big eyes full of expectation. Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly and he said, "She is not my girlfriend." Upon hearing this, Fang Shueqing was stunned, and her face slowly turned pale. Chen Tao continued, "She is my woman, my wife." Fang Shueqing was startled, and her face slowly turned red. Her heart, which had hit rock bottom, recovered again, and there was a smile on her face. Li Jin smiled and said, "Well, that's it. I'm planning to shoot a TV series recently, and the actress for the heroine hasn't been decided yet. We've been looking for someone, but we've never been satisfied. Until today, we saw your love. I think she fits our heroine perfectly. As long as you answer the question, we can give you a deposit of 300 years." Li Jin looked at Chen Tao and said with a smile, "Your lover's salary will be higher than what we pay." 300 years. The people nearby who secretly listened to the conversation suddenly took a breath of cold air. That's a full 300 years. And 300 years is just a deposit. And he said the pay could be higher. Isn't this too exaggerated? Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. This gentleman at this time, another voice came from the side. Chen Tao turned his head and saw a man in blue. The man in blue looked at Chen Tao and said, "Let me introduce myself first. My name is Johan, and I am the chief designer of Kadoria. Kadoria is a lingerie brand, and that brand is most famous for their supermodels. The models signed by Kadoria are each more famous than the other. The man in front of me is actually the chief designer of Kadoria. I just saw them eating together." Could it be that because Li Jing couldn't find the heroine he needed, he asked Johan to find a supermodel to replace the heroine? Johan looked at Chen Tao and said, "I want to sign your lover as a model for my Kadoria. I think your lover's figure and temperament will be enough to become popular in a short time and become a rich area. No, it should be the most beautiful supermodel in this Earth star continent." Johan spoke casually, but as the chief designer of Kadoria, he had the qualification to say this. After all, the supermodels of Kadoria are among the most beautiful women in the world. A well-known director wants to sign Fang Shueqing as the heroine of his new drama, and a well-known designer wants Fang Shueqing to be their model. The women next to them looked at the side and cast envious eyes on Fang Shueqing. Fang Shueqing was a little at a loss. She looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked at Li Jin and Johan, and said lightly, "I don't plan to let my wife become an actor or a model." Almost everyone on the scene thought that Chen Tao would agree, but to everyone's surprise, Chen Tao actually refused. This. Li Jin was stunned. He didn't expect Chen Tao to refuse so decisively. That was a deposit of 300 years. "Sir, I am willing to pay an annual salary for 1,000 years to sign your lover," Johan said. The spectators took a deep breath. 1,000 years, that is an income that many people dream of. People in this world, or until time passes until death, have almost no chance to see such a large amount of time. It can be seen how much Johan values Fang Shueqing. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 166. Directly saying an annual salary of 1,000 years, this is absolutely high-tech. It seems that Johan is determined to get Fang Shueqing. Annual salary of 1,000 years, my god, this is a high salary that others dream of. However, it is normal for him to offer such a high annual salary. Look at that woman, with such a beautiful face, who among the supermodels in Kadoria can compare with her? That's right, the beauty's appearance is indeed qualified to bear such an annual salary. Guess, will the man who was so tough just now agree? Looking at the woman's appearance, the woman seems to have given the choice to the man. Haha, that's an annual salary of 1,000 years. I don't think anyone would refuse it. What's more, it won't be him who will work at that time. That's right. Almost everyone on the field believed that Chen Tao would never refuse such a thing. However, Chen Tao said lightly, "I said, I don't plan to let my lover be an actor, nor do I plan to let my lover be a supermodel. No matter how much you offer, I will not change my mind." Johan was slightly stunned. There was a hint of surprise in the discussion beside him. Rejected? They actually rejected it? How could it be possible? That's 1,000-year annual salary. How could they refuse it? Li Jin, who was standing by, looked at Johan beside him and smiled. "Mr. Johan, you offered such a high price, but you got rejected in the end." Johan frowned slightly, looked at Chen Tao, and then said, "Brother, you have to think clearly. As long as you let your lover sign a contract with me, you can get 1,000-year annual salary. That's 1,000-year annual salary, which ordinary people dream of." He didn't seem to want to give up yet. Chen Tao said, "Please don't disturb us for dinner." Li Jin smiled and said, Mr. Johan, it looks like it's still not working. Johan frowned and looked at Chen Tao. Seeing Chen Tao's expressionless face, Johan's eyes fell on Fang Shueqing. He said, "Miss, your beauty can bring you huge wealth. This matter is related to you. You can make your own choice." Seeing that Chen Tao couldn't pass the test, he seemed to plan to poach directly. Fang Shueqing frowned slightly, and said, "I listen to my lover." Johan was startled, and he sprayed dust again. He frowned slightly. Johan pondered for a moment, and his eyes returned to Chen Tao. Johan also realized that if he wanted to take down that woman, he could only start with this man. Johan looked at Chen Tao and said, "I have seen many people from the upper class, and you look very unfamiliar. I can almost be sure that I have never seen you. Since I have never seen you, it means that your status is average. With your status and income, do you think you can afford a woman of this appearance?" Chen Tao's expression did not change at all. He said lightly, "I can afford it or not, there is no need to tell you." Hearing this, Johan frowned, squinted his eyes, and said, "Look at the remaining time she has, I think you probably can't afford to support her." The remaining time? Chen Tao frowned slightly, and his eyes fell on Fang Shueqing's wrist. Fang Shueqing subconsciously retracted her wrist. Chen Tao stretched out his hand and held Fang Shueqing's hand, otherwise Fang Shueqing would withdraw her hand. He looked at the time number displayed on Fang Shueqing's wrist. The number showed Fang Shueqing had 15 days left. Seeing this, Chen Tao was slightly stunned. He looked at Fang Shueqing. Since Chen Tao's gene was upgraded, he had an infinite lifespan, and the time displayed on his wrist also became infinity. Chen Tao had upgraded the women around him, and basically Ziking and the others had infinite lifespans. When Chen Tao saw Fang Shueqing, he subconsciously thought that she also had it. But now it seems that Chen Tao misunderstood. Fang Shueqing's parents are genetic bodies, and she only had some genetic mutations, so she got the energy to control nature, but this did not affect her lifespan. Fang Shueqing also has a lifespan limit. No wonder Johan just thought that Chen Tao could not afford Fang Shueqing. It turned out that he noticed Fang Shueqing's wrist. Chen Tao was wearing a suit at the moment, with his wrists blocked by his sleeves, so Johan could only see the time Fang Shueqing had. Chen Tao looked at Xueqian and said, "I didn't notice this, it was my mistake." Fang Shueqing was slightly startled. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "It's okay." Her expression was a little embarrassed. In Fang Shueqing's view, time is equal to wealth, but she only has this little time and is seen by her beloved man. She is very embarrassed. 15 days, a beauty like her shouldn't run around with only this little time. Johan said lightly, "As long as you sign a contract with my company, I can immediately pay a deposit of 500 years, how about it?" Johan looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao frowned, this guy is really a bit entangled. Chen Tao was a little annoyed. He glanced at Johan and said, "Do you remember that you have a lot of time?" Johan crossed his arms and looked down at Chen Tao. He said calmly, "At least I don't have to worry about my life being threatened by time." The implication was that Chen Tao was a poor guy who would be chased by time. Chen Tao said calmly, "It seems that you are very confident. How about we take a gamble?" "Betting?" Johan looked at Chen Tao and said, "What are you betting on?" Chen Tao looked at the cup on the table. He picked up the cup and said calmly, "Bet on the money we have now to see who has the most." Compared with the current time, Johan showed a disdainful smile and said, "Your lover only has 15 days, how many days can you have? I am the chief designer of Kadoria. Time is very important to me. It's just a bunch of numbers. You're overestimating your abilities when you compare them to me." Chen Tao said, "Having confidence is a good thing, so do you dare to compete?" He shook the water in the water glass in his hand and said lightly. Johan said, "Of course, what if I have more than you?" Chen Tao looked at Fang Shueqing and said, if you have more money than me, I will let Fang Shueqing sign a contract with you according to your wish. Fang Shueqing looked at Chen Tao, her eyes glowing with luster. Johan's eyes lit up slightly and he said, okay. This is what you said. Chen Tao said, so, what if I have more than you? This is impossible, Johan said, however, since you have to bet, you must be fair. If you have more than me, then I will give you all the time I have. How about it? Chen Tao said, this is not enough. You have just humiliated me, so I have to defend my shame. If you lose, I want you to run naked around this restaurant 3 times. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 167. Johan's eyebrows suddenly furrowed, you guy. If you don't dare, don't bet, Chen Tao said lightly. Upon hearing this, Johan snorted and said, bet, why don't I dare to bet? Not betting would be equivalent to admitting defeat. Just now he looked down on the time Chen Tao had. If he admits defeat now, wouldn't he be beating himself up? Face. You have to gamble. Johan said, then how do you want to bet? Just roll up your sleeves. No need, Chen Tao said, I plan to give my lover a certain amount of time. It just depends on who gives the most time. Johan showed a playful smile and said, oh, I understand. Are you planning to rely on this bet to earn some time for your lover? What a good idea. Chen Tao said lightly, if I win, the time you have now is mine. If I lose, we will naturally give the time back to you. He was too lazy to say anything more and stretched out his hand to Fang Shueqing. Fang Shueqing looked at Chen Tao, raised her hand and placed it in Chen Tao's palm. After hearing what Chen Tao said, Johan stopped talking. Fang Shueqing looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao said, are you afraid? Fang Shueqing pursed her lower lip. She looked at Chen Tao and said, don't be afraid, I believe you. Fang Shueqing didn't seem to know that Chen Tao had unlimited lifespan and unlimited time. She was a little nervous. Chen Tao smiled and said, okay. He put his wrist on Fang Shueqing's wrist. The time on Fang Shueqing's wrist is increasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. 15 days from the beginning. It turned into a year. 2 years. 3 years. 10 years. 100 years. Johan's expression slowly changed on the side. 1,000 years. Seeing this, Johan's eyebrows suddenly furrowed. 1,000 years. 100,000 years. Seeing this, Johan's eyes were trembling. Impossible. Seeing that the time number jumped to 100,000 years later, Chen Tao slowly took it back. He looked at Fang Shueqing and said, this can be used for a while. When I get back, I will upgrade your genes. Fang Shueqing looked at the time on her wrist, her eyes filled with surprise. She looked at Chen Tao and nodded slightly. Chen Tao looked at Johan and saw that Johan's face was as pale as paper. He looked at Chen Tao with an expression of disbelief and said, you. Li Jin on the side could not help but smack his mouth, his eyes were filled with disbelief. 100,000 years. What is this concept? Even if Kadoria, the most famous underwear company in the continent, sold all its supermodels, real estate, and the entire company, it would not take 100,000 years. And the man in front of him can easily take out 100,000 years. That's ridiculous, right? Li Jin subconsciously rubbed his eyes and looked again. He swallowed and then looked at Johan. Chen Tao looked at Johan and said, what are you? How about you? Do you want to compete? Johan clenched his fist, raised his hand and approached Fang Shueqing. Fang Shueqing also raised her wrist. Johan put his wrist on Fang Shueqing's wrist, but his hand was trembling. Slowly, Johan transferred time into Fang Shueqing's wrist. The time slowly increases. 1 year, 2 years. 10 years. Century. Millennium. By about 3,000 years. Johann was shocked and his body fell to the ground without any movement. Fang Shueqing was stunned. She hurriedly squatted down, pulled up Johann's sleeves, and exposed Johann's sleeves. The time on Johann's sleeve became 0. Seeing this, Fang Shueqing raised her face and looked at Chen Tao. He is dead. Chen Tao frowned slightly. Would you rather die than suffer such humiliation? What an idea. Dead. Is there such a way to commit suicide? Oh my God, he actually committed suicide here. This person is too crazy. Sorry, please leave quickly, otherwise people from Hong Tao's organization will come later and we won't be implicated. After a while, those people paid their bills and left. Chen Tao didn't expect that this guy Johann would do this. Chen Tao came here to have a meal, so this made things worse again. Time stops passing. Everything around turned into blue code. Chen Tao looked at Johann below. Johann's body also turned into a blue code, but the code after death was different from that of a living person. A part is missing. Chen Tao rewrote it, added some of the lost code to Johann, and then gave him some time to write. Time resumes its passage. Johann moved his body and slowly opened his eyes. He looked at the ceiling, then raised his hand and looked at the remaining 15 days on his wrist. He froze for a moment, climbed up, and looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao said calmly, "If you want to die in front of me, you must obtain my consent." Johann was startled, his eyes widened, and he looked at Chen Tao in disbelief. "I deliberately reset the time to 0, can you save me?" Li Jin on the side was also frightened, and his mouth opened slightly. Johann was clearly dead just now. After time returns to 0, the person will be absolutely dead and cannot be saved. This is common sense, but just at this moment, Johann was actually saved by this man? Chen Tao looked back and said, "You have already died once, forget about running naked, go away, don't let me see you again." If Johann died here, Chen Tao would have a headache. He came here to eat. If Johann died, he would have nothing to eat and the matter would get out of hand. Johann is more valuable alive than dead. At least he would get out of this restaurant by himself. Johann was about to say something, but Li Jin said, "Mr. Johann, forget it." Johann looked at Li Jin when he heard it. Johann opened his mouth, but could only close it again. He adjusted his mood, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "Thank you." After that, Johann left with Li Jin. That thank you was probably for Chen Tao saving his life. Of course, for Chen Tao, Johann didn't need to thank him, because Chen Tao just wanted to have a good breakfast for himself. Not dead. Hey, didn't the time return to 0? This. Seeing that the matter had gotten out of hand, the spectators who wanted to check out and leave early saw that Johann was alive. Everyone was a little stunned. Li Jin paid the bill with Johann and left. "Sir, the beef ribs you ordered are ready," a voice came from the side. Chen Tao looked at the waitress beside him, his eyebrows slightly stretched, and said, "Yes." The waitress brought the meal to the table. Open the lid, pour black pepper sauce on the beef ribs, and a fragrance came to the face. Smelling this fragrance, Chen Tao also had an appetite. He picked up the knife and fork and slowly started to eat. Fang Shueqing, who was beside him, followed Chen Tao and slowly enjoyed this delicious breakfast. When she ate a piece of meat, Fang Shueqing's eyes lit up slightly, she looked at Chen Tao and said, "It's delicious." Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Fang Shueqing, and seeing Fang Shueqing's shining eyes, Chen Tao smiled and said, "If you like it, eat more. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 168. Seeing Fang Shueqing's face full of joy, Chen Tao was in a good mood. Sure enough, it feels good to go shopping here and eat something. Finished a breakfast. Chen Tao was not in a hurry to go back, so he drove Fang Shueqing to the park for a walk. There are still many people out for a walk or morning jog in the park in the morning. As before, wherever Chen Tao and Fang Shueqing passed by, they would always attract a lot of attention. No, someone else is coming over. They are a pair of girls. The two girls are wearing youthful and energetic clothes and look very sunny. Can I take a photo with you? The girl who spoke had a mobile phone in her hand. She looked at Fang Shueqing, her eyes full of expectation. Seeing this, Fang Shueqing was slightly startled and looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao smiled and said, "Let them take a photo." Fang Shueqing pursed her lips, then looked at the girls and nodded slightly, "Okay." Hearing Fang Shueqing's voice, the two girls' eyes lit up. What a crisp voice. It sounds so comfortable. Not only are you beautiful, your voice is also really nice. Being praised, Fang Shueqing had a smile on her face. Here, look at the camera. Two girls stood on either side of Fang Shueqing. They approached Fang Shueqing, then took a photo with their mobile phones. Fang Shueqing had a smile on her face. After taking the photo, they looked at their phones and looked at the photos inside. The girl in the white shirt looked at Fang Shueqing and said with a smile, "You are so photogenic, so beautiful. By the way, you are the charming fox demon in Cos, right? So beautiful, so similar." Fang Shueqing could only smile kindly and didn't know how to answer. Seeing Fang Shueqing's overwhelmed look, Chen Tao found it quite interesting. Fang Shueqing was a very unpopular existence in the previous world. In the eyes of others, she was just a monster and a plaything. For those people, the only thing Fang Shueqing had to do was to kill. But now there are people who are full of enthusiasm and goodwill towards Fang Shueqing. While Fang Shueqing feels very good, she is also a little overwhelmed. Because she has never encountered anything like this. The two girls pestered Fang Shueqing to ask questions, then waved to Fang Shueqing with satisfaction and left. Fang Shueqing walked to Chen Tao and took Chen Tao's arm. Chen Tao looked at Fang Shueqing. Fang Shueqing had a smile on her face, and her charming red eyes were full of joy. The furry tail behind her swayed slightly, looking very energetic. It seems that she doesn't hate this. Chen Tao smiled and looked away. "You civilized people are so strange," Fang Shueqing said suddenly. Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Fang Shueqing and said with a smile, "Why is it weird?" When Fang Shueqing heard this, she looked at Chen Tao and said with a smile, "They were not afraid at all when they saw me like this. Instead, they were so enthusiastic. Some people came to take pictures. It felt very strange." Chen Tao smiled. Civilizations have different levels of development. For our civilization, it is not strange to walk on the road with ears and tails. Many people can accept it. Fang Shueqing said, "It's great, if my civilization is like this, it would be even better." Chen Tao looked at Fang Shueqing and found that Fang Shueqing looked a little disappointed. Seeing this, Chen Tao was silent for a moment, slowly raised his hand, gently stroked Shueqing's hair below, and said softly, "This will be your home from now on, and the Baiyun civilization is just the place where you were born, and this is your real future home." Fang Shueqing was startled. She raised her face and looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked at Fang Shueqing and said with a smile, "I am your man. When we are together, we are combined, which is the real home. And the Baiyun civilization you were in before is just the place where you were born and settled. It is not a home. Now you have me and sisters like Zi Cheng. From now on, you can live here well and give birth to a bunch of little foxes for me." Upon hearing this, Fang Shueqing's eyes as clear as sapphires shone with a hint of luster. Her face was filled with happiness, and she said, "Well, Shueqing will work hard." Chen Tao smiled and gently held her waist with his hand. Fang Shueqing also slowly leaned her little head on Chen Tao's arm. She seemed very attached. The two of them were walking in the park. After walking for more than an hour, the sun gradually became brighter and the surrounding temperature gradually increased. Feeling this, Chen Tao suggested going home. Fang Shueking's heart has been captured by Chen Tao, so she will naturally not refuse. The two returned to base 1. Return to the bedroom. Fang Shueking looked at Chen Tao and said, "I'm going to take a bath." Chen Tao blinked, smiled, and said, "Okay, just wear less clothes at home. I'm the only one anyway." Fang Shueking's face turned slightly red, she nodded slightly and said, "Well." She blushed and walked to the bathroom. Seeing this, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly, he slowly looked away, walked to the sofa and sat down. Taking a shower as soon as you get home is a good thing for girls. Even for those like Lin and others who are already immune to cold and heat and don't suffer from cold sweats, it would be best to take a shower after returning home. Just because they don't sweat doesn't mean that the dust from outside won't fall on them. Bathing is still a must. Chen Tao was sitting on the sofa, making tea and drinking. As soon as he sat down, Chen Tao couldn't help but have 1,000 thoughts. He couldn't help but think of what he heard on the news yesterday. Now that the population of Earth is increasing, and the land is getting more and more expensive, can we develop the Antarctic continent and live there? Frankly speaking, the temperature in Antarctica is too low. Only the second-generation gene bodies can be unaffected in such places. Other ordinary people will probably become popsicles if they get close to them in a short time. It doesn't matter. Chen Tao thought to himself that if that day really comes, the worst thing he can do is to take the girls around him and move directly to another planet. What's more, the place where Chen Tao lives is in the sky, and there is no need for land or anything. Thinking of this, Chen Tao raised his face and opened a picture to take a look. There are several pictures in total. Through this picture, you can see the movements of all the girls in this base number 1. Ziking is on the deck, holding a sniper rifle, using Z2 material as a target, and is training her sniping ability. He Yuxuan is calculating the micro wormhole. She seems to be trying to move herself without using the micro wormhole. This is really high-tech. Bessie stood by and watched, occasionally giving them some guidance. Wu Yao was in a warehouse, and there was a sports car in the warehouse, but the sports car had been modified into a way that Chen Tao couldn't understand. Wu Yao was seriously using the other world to program the sports car. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 169. Wu Yao has always liked high-tech things, and even now, she has not changed. Whenever Wu Yao has free time, he will do research. Wu Yao seemed to be unable to disturb him. Through Lin's picture, Chen Tao saw a pool. Lin was soaking in the pool, washing her body quietly. Lin has an amazing figure, mature and beautiful, and her skin is as white as cream. Her temperament is different from Fang Shueking's pure enchanting charm. She has a kind of sanctity and heroism, rather like a warrior. But when Chen Tao is domineering, she will also show her weak side. Shasha. Chen Tao suddenly heard the movement coming from around him. When he came back to his senses, he saw a scene that made Chen Tao's eyes light up slightly. Fang Shueking had already come out of the shower. She had bare feet and was wearing a thin gauze skirt. The gauze skirt clung to her figure and perfectly outlined her proud figure. She grasped her waist and held up the fabric at the top. Her skirt was very short, and her legs, which were about 1 meter tall, were slender and straight. Fang Shueking's skin is like gelatin. She has a pair of blue phoenix eyes and delicate facial features. She is naturally charming with a smile and a frown. Seeing Chen Tao looking at her, Fang Shueking showed a charming smile to Chen Tao and said, "I will dress like this from now on, okay?" Chen Tao was speechless. He stood up, came to Fang Shueking, held her in his arms, and walked to the bed. Fang Xueqing put her hands around Chen Tao's neck and looked directly at Chen Tao, her eyes filled with water. It was noon when we returned to base 1, and time was passing by little by little. By the time Chen Tao came to his senses, it was already evening. Chen Tao was wearing a bathrobe, holding a glass of boiled water, standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, looking at the red clouds outside. He took a sip of plain water. There is a lot of expensive red wine at home, but you don't drink it, but drink boiled water. Isn't it a bit wasteful? A voice came from beside me. Chen Tao came to his senses and looked at the tall woman beside him. The person coming was none other than Lin. Lin looked at Chen Tao with a smile. Chen Tao smiled, looked at the clouds in front of him, and said, "Before, I was really interested in those expensive wines, so I asked number 1 to buy a lot, then I drank a lot, but I couldn't get used to it. In the end, I still think boiled water is more suitable for me." "What about tea?" Lin smiled and said, "I think the taste of tea is quite interesting." "Tea is not bad. It's just that making tea is a little more troublesome. It's better to boil water directly," Chen Tao said. Lin's eyebrows slightly stretched, her hands crossed her chest, looking at the scenery in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, and said, "That's right." Chen Tao breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Are you still used to staying here during this time?" Lin hummed and said, "I'm not used to it. There are so many fun places and things in Earth Star, and there are many styles of clothes. It's different in our Dragon City. It's a battle armor, so there won't be many changes. This is something I'm not used to." Chen Tao said, "Then, do you still like it?" "It's one thing to like it. It's one thing to not be used to it. It's another thing to like it. I think this place is quite interesting and I like it very much." She turned to look at Chen Tao. She smiled and said, "If the other people in Longren City, it would be nice if sisters could enjoy peace like now." She was hinting that Chen Tao should find more sisters from Dragon City. Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly, and he said, "If you have time, you can call your sisters in Dragon City and let them enjoy some peace and quiet. It is impossible to find girls from Dragon City, but let Longren City, it's okay for the female dragons from Renchinj to come over and have fun." "That's not possible," Lin said. "Sisters need to go on missions anytime and anywhere. Maintaining the balance of the universe is not as easy as imagined. It is impossible to take time off to relax." Chen Tao hummed. Lin never left Dragon City. It was obvious that even if she became Chen Tao's dragon girl, she still could not forget the place where she lived and her faith. There is no way, it is impossible for Lin to change her belief for 700 years in a short time. Chen Tao said nothing. Lin looked at Chen Tao beside her. She looked away and said, "A lot of enemies appeared from the small universe a while ago. I heard that in order to prevent them from invading our universe, you fought against tens of thousands of them by yourself, and you still won." She looked at Chen Tao and said with a smile, "You are Lin's hero." Hearing this, Chen Tao said, "After all, allowing them to invade the universe will also have an impact on the Earth and stars. If it affects the Earth and stars, I guess I will not be immune to the impact by then, so it is better to take action first." Lin pursed her lips and smiled, then looked away. "I know what you are thinking." As she spoke, she stopped talking. Chen Tao turned his face sideways and looked at Lin's profile. It could be seen that Lin was a little happy. Chen Tao's involvement in the dragon people's affairs can be regarded as maintaining the balance of the universe in disguise. Lin was naturally happy about this matter. Chen Tao looked at Lin today. Lin was wearing a white shirt that clung to her mature figure. The hem of the shirt was very short, and her long and straight legs could be seen, which were wrapped in white stockings. She is a beauty. She is a tall beauty. And this beautiful woman gave up her faith for Chen Tao and became a housewife-like existence, working silently beside Chen Tao. Abandoning the faith she had held for 700 years, she gave everything she had to Chen Tao. This kind of thing may sound innocuous, but to actually do it is not something ordinary people can endure. Chen Tao slowly raised his hand and put his arm around Lin's shoulders. Lin was slightly startled. She raised her face and looked at Chen Tao. Eyes facing each other. Chen Tao used a little more force with his hands and gently pulled her into his arms. He lowered his face. Lin's eyes were filled with clear water vapor, her eyelashes moved, and she slowly raised her face. Chen Tao kissed her lips. Separate slowly. Lin looked at Chen Tao with watery eyes. She smiled and slowly leaned her head on Chen Tao's chest. Appears to be dependent in every possible way. Chen Tao gently stroked her arm to soothe her little emotions. Chen Tao withdrew his gaze and looked at the scenery ahead. Husband, suddenly, a voice sounded, interrupting the warm atmosphere. Chen Tao was slightly startled, and turned his head to look at the door. He Yuxuan, Ziyiqing and Rose were seen standing at the door together. The speaker was He Yuxuan. He Yuxuan's eyes were filled with a hint of splendor. She walked up to Chen Tao and said with a smile, "Honey, I heard from Rose that there is a special kind of food in a place in our universe. I heard that it is very, very delicious. It's delicious, I want to try it." Hearing this, Chen Tao blinked. Space food? When did He Yuxuan become a foodie? My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 170. Chen Tao looked at Rose. Rose folded her hands on her chest, looked here with a smile, and said, "The three of us were having lunch just now, and then we talked about food." Yuxuan seemed to be quite interested in food. She heard that there is a kind of food in the known universe. It was very delicious food, and she said she wanted to go. Chen Tao looked at He Yuxuan, he smiled, and said, "If you like it, go ahead. You don't need to ask me about this kind of thing." He put the water cup in his hand into the miniature wormhole and stroked He Yuxuan's hair with his hand. He Yuxuan looked at Chen Tao and said, "But, I want to eat with you. Want to go together?" Chen Tao shook his head and said, "No, I'm not that interested in the world outside our planet. If you go and buy it, just bring some to me." He Yuxuan's eyebrows stretched slightly, seeming a little disappointed. She said, "Okay." She looked at Ziyiqing and said, "Ziyiqing, just the two of us and Rose will go together." Ziyiqing was slightly startled and said, My. She didn't seem to want to go either. He Yuxuan held Ziyiqing's hand and said, "Ziking, well, if you don't go, then it will be even more boring for me." Ziyiqing pursed her lips and looked at He Yuxuan's shining eyes. She nodded slightly and said, "Okay." Ziyiqing looked at Rose and said, "Sister Rose, are you not in danger?" Rose showed a smile and said, "Those civilized people worship peace, and they are also a group of foodies. Their aggression is very low, and even if they want to fight with us, with the abilities of you and Yuxuan's 3 generations of genes, even if they stand still, they can't do anything to you." Hearing this, Ziyiqing nodded slightly and said, "Okay then. Let's go." He Yuxuan looked at Rose and said, "We don't know the location of that place, so we have to trouble you." Rose smiled, "It's a small thing." She raised her hand and drew a circle, and a miniature wormhole appeared in front of her. Rose stepped inside, followed by He Yuxuan. Ziyiqing was the last one. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Well, husband, I'll go there first." Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, "Pay attention to safety." Ziyiqing nodded slightly, and then entered the miniature wormhole. The miniature wormhole slowly closed and disappeared before Chen Tao's eyes. Chen Tao did not expect that He Yuxuan would be interested in food. But that's normal. I believe many people are interested in food. Chen Tao withdrew his gaze and looked at Lin beside him. Lin was looking at the place where the miniature wormhole disappeared. Chen Tao smiled and said, "Are you going?" When Lin heard this, she came back to her senses. She smiled and said, "You don't need me, I'm not very interested in eating. Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled, raised his hand and hugged Lin Hung into his arms. Lin was slightly startled and looked at Chen Tao with her big eyes. Chen Tao looked at Lin and said, even if you're not interested, I can't make you hungry. I'll feed you something more delicious. Upon hearing this, Lin blushed slightly. Early morning hours. Lin's consciousness slowly returned, and she slowly opened her eyes. As soon as she opened her eyes, she saw a handsome face. The owner of this face is none other than Chen Tao. Looking at the handsome face in front of her, Lin's eyes glowed with a hint of luster, and a smile appeared on her face. Slowly lying in Chen Tao's arms, closing his eyes, feeling the warmth of the man's embrace. In the past, Lin was a pure warrior. But things are different now. Lin has transitioned from a pure warrior to Chen Tao's woman. Lin was actually not used to it. As a warrior, you must maintain your best condition and be ready to deal with enemies that may appear at any time. But now that she has become Chen Tao's woman, her responsibilities have changed. Her only responsibility now is to make Chen Tao happy. She wasn't used to it, but luckily, Chen Tao was very kind to her. I love her very much. This is enough, and her efforts can be considered as a response. This is what she likes. Chen Tao slowly opened his eyes and looked at Lin, who was already asleep in his arms. He raised his hand, gently stroked her hair, and kissed her forehead tenderly. Feeling Chen Tao's pity and love, the corners of Lin's mouth raised slightly. The two enjoyed this rare warmth. Husband. Suddenly, Chen Tao heard a voice. The voice comes from Chen Tao's brain, and this is Katie's voice. It was Katie's voice talking to Chen Tao through the genetic channel. Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly and he said, Katie? What's wrong? Hearing the name Katie, Lin raised her face and looked at Chen Tao. Katie said, something happened to Bai Yao. Bai Yao? The White Dragon King Bai Yao? Chen Tao said, why did something happen to her? Did people from other universes come to cause trouble again? Bai Yao possesses third-generation genes. Apart from Katie and Rose, there is no one else in the known universe who can fight Bai Yao. But it is impossible for Katie to fight Bai Yao, and Rose is now with Ziyiqing and the others. Then the only possibility is that they are people from other universes. It's not something done by people outside the universe. I upgraded the fourth-generation genes. I thought about upgrading Bai Yao's genes, but something went wrong. The current situation cannot be solved with the technology I have, so I thought of. Chen Tao frowned slightly. Although Katie's voice was still calm, after staying with Katie for a long time, Chen Tao could still hear her nervousness. Bai Yao can be said to be Katie's best friend. And now that something happened to Bai Yao, it would be strange if Katie wasn't nervous. Chen Tao said, well, okay, I'll go there. Chen Tao looked at Lin in his arms. Lin looked at Chen Tao and said, what's going on? Chen Tao said, something happened, I need to go over and take a look. I think it's not a big deal. Don't worry. Seeing the solemnity and tension in Lin's eyes, Chen Tao comforted her. Lin nodded slightly. Chen Tao got out of bed, put on his clothes, and looked at Lin beside him. He said, let's go. Lin nodded slightly. Chen Tao's figure disappeared from the spot. When he appeared again, Chen Tao's figure appeared next to Katie. He looked forward and found Bai Yao lying on the bed in front of him with his eyes closed. When Katie saw Chen Tao appear, her eyes glowed and she said, after I obtained your gene, husband, I analyzed the gene and upgraded myself to the fourth generation. After that, I handed over the gene code of the fourth generation. I gave it to Bai Yao. As a result, she fell into a coma after using it. Katie looked at Chen Tao and said, husband, help me, save her. She has been my sister since 7 million years ago, and we have had a sisterly love for 7 million years now. Hearing this, Chen Tao nodded slightly, and his eyes fell on Bai Yao. Time stops passing. Chen Tao looked at Bai Yao, who was lying on the bed. There was a code on Bai Yao's body, but the problem was, the code was missing and he was completely different from ordinary people. This is like a corpse. Chen Tao frowned. Dead.